Welcome to Imaging Alaska. My name is Ward Hinger. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Alaska Radiology Associates and the CEO for Imaging Associates. Today I have with me my wonderful Dr. Matt Miner, one of our newer neuroradiologists, and we're going to dive into the world of neuroradiology today. That's something you don't get every day. Just a little bit of background about Imaging Associates. Imaging Associates is a premier outpatient imaging centers in South Central Alaska. We have a beautiful site in Anchorage. We have a nice brand new site in Eagle River and our wonderful flagship in Palmer, Alaska. Now to you, Dr. Matt Miner. So a little bit about your background. I heard the other day that you're from South Dakota. I'm from North Dakota. And of course, we've already talked a little bit about football and hockey. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about your home state that made you who you are, your DNA?
You know, I think growing up in South Dakota, it's a unique place in that it's a small community, much like Alaska. So you get to know everybody that you're around and everybody in the community. I come from a fairly big family. My grandfather was a twin. Each of them had 7 kids, so there were 14 children at one point, and that's just those two. There were also, their family had about 7 people, so I'm related to like a large number of people within my community back in South Dakota. And so I think it's, you know, growing up with that kind of sense of community, it's something that you kind of expound on when you go elsewhere. I left South Dakota, though, to go get educated. So I went to Georgetown for undergraduate, and I was actually at Georgetown in 2001.
Wow.
So September was the first month of college for me. So September 2001. I sat on, Georgetown has these apartments that overlook the Potomac River. And from those apartments, you can see the Pentagon.
Wow.
So we sat on September 11th watching the Pentagon burn. And I think in that point in the back of my mind, I was like, I need to help somehow. I always knew I wanted to go into medicine. And so I figured eventually when I got into medical school, it'd be good to join the military.
Wow. Well, you've unpacked a lot there. Let's just do rewind a little bit. Yeah. So what inspired you to go into medicine?
I think
you didn't go into farming. You didn't go into the traditional occupation in South Dakota. What inspired you to open the door into medicine?
That's true. So I think a big part of it was science. I was always interested in science, and anatomy really got my attention. And I knew from an early age that I was interested in anatomy, and I thought I might want to be a physician and kind of break away from traditional South Dakota kind of lines of going into professionalism. So I knew from an early age that I kind of wanted to go into medicine.
What was it like getting into Georgetown? Because that's a pretty prestigious university. I lived in Washington, D.C., by the way.
Yeah.
I served at Boeing Air Force Base. I was with General Murray at the Air Force Medical Operations Agency. We lived in Waldorf, Maryland, just outside. We didn't have kids, so school wasn't that important to us, not putting anything down on Maryland, but Virginia usually had the better academics. But a very, very interesting time indeed. I left Washington, D.C. 4 days before 9/11. Coming back to Alaska, woke up in Bozeman, Montana, and saw what you saw firsthand.
Yeah.
Really, really sad sight. But back to Georgetown. I mean, what was the process of getting admitted to Georgetown?
I think back then, it's not that long ago, but it was a little different in that you didn't have social media. You didn't have as much internet exposure to things. And so the only exposure I had to most of the colleges that I applied to was either I'd visited them or I'd been in the area. So, you know, as a normal middle schooler, you take your 8th grade trip or whatever it is to Washington, D.C., and we saw Georgetown, and I was like, this is amazing. It looks awesome. The environment was something that I enjoyed, and I got a chance to listen to a little bit more about the university, and I was like, this is a good fit for me. So
it's a beautiful campus.
Yeah.
I obviously didn't go to Georgetown. I don't even know if I finished high school, but outside of that, so then from there, with regards to medical school, what was that transition from Georgetown to medical school? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I did 4 years of undergrad at Georgetown, and then I did a master's in physiology and biophysics at Georgetown. From there, when I was applying to medical school, you know, I went back and thought about the fact that I thought that maybe I could, you know, join the military or do something that could help the country. And so I applied to USHIS, which is the military's medical school, essentially in Bethesda, Maryland. With that application, you essentially apply to medical school and then to one of the branches of the military.
Now, that stands for Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences, correct?
That is correct.
I'm just unpacking that for not so military layman's terms. So.
Yeah, we use a lot of acronyms, I think, in the military and in medicine in general. But when you apply to there, you go in as a second lieutenant. So you go through officer training and then you enter into medical school, basically. And while in medical school, you are wearing the uniform, you're basically in the military in active reserves. And following all of the UCMJ and all of that, but you get to use military facilities for your training, essentially.
What a great opportunity. And then moving on to medical school, to residency. San Antonio, correct?
Yep. Yeah, so I went down to San Antonio. I was down there from 2010 to 2015, so 5 years down in San Antonio. That's actually where I met a couple of the other members in our group currently. So Jerry York was one of the neuro staff down there while I was a resident, and Darren Shirley was also down there as one of the staff when I was a resident to start out residency, and then Dr. Osteen or Brittany came down towards the end of residency too, so she was a staff down there as well. So
we love poaching from the military. It's quite amazing. And your first experience with Alaska Radiology Associates was when you were actually at JBER as a radiologist there.
And that's correct. So as soon as I finished residency, I came up to Alaska and I was stationed at JBER.
Now, Dr. York is an interesting individual. He has a very fascinating background. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. He's currently serving as our lead neuroradiologist. Can you explain a little bit about what it was like to have someone with his caliber of achievements mentor you early on in medicine, and then as you gravitated into radiology?
Yeah, so I think it's always important to have good mentors early on when you're training and getting to learn things. And those are usually the mentors that are going to inspire you to go into a certain field or kind of guide you where to go in the future. And so for me, neuro was always a strong area in residency. And I think Dr. York, when I was a resident, we always kind of looked at him as like, wow, how does he know all this information? How does he just know it? And I would always remember, when we were down in San Antonio, he would get a phone call and he'd walk out of the room and he'd be like, what was that for? And they're like, oh, that's the White House calling him to see what, look at TBI kind of stuff, because he was kind of the foremost expert in TBI imaging for the military at that time. And
TBI stands for traumatic brain injury, right?
Correct.
And my understanding with regards to Dr. York, he was the world's subject matter expert on TBI.
Yes, for the military, I mean, he basically set up a bunch of the programs that exist right now. And when he left the military, he brought it up here to Alaska.
And even the NFL reached out to him as a subject matter expert on TBI.
Correct.
With regards, I think there was a movie on this concussion.
Yep.
Did you ever see the movie?
I don't think I ever saw the movie.
Well, you don't tell Dr. York you never saw that movie, but he was actually the real neuroradiologist in the real life event that they reached out to for his subject matter expertise. And it's crazy. I think he's still connected back to Washington, D.C., to the think tanks. I think he recently accepted a position. Are you aware of that?
I am not, but it would not surprise me.
He's a very humble man. He doesn't say a lot. And his background, to further elaborate, Sergeant York was, I think, his grandfather in World War II. Did you see the movie Sergeant York?
Another one I have not seen. Don't tell Jerry.
Yes, we'll have to get that into your lap. But what a fascinating military history that he has, and very proud of that. So now we're looking at, gosh, you've gone through medical school and you're looking at, your residency is finished. Now your fellowship, and I'm assuming Dr. York had a lot of influence on your fellowship.
Yeah. Basically for me, when I finished residency, it was between going into musculoskeletal imaging or neuroimaging. Those are the two areas I had very strong mentors in. And I leaned a little bit more towards neuro, and Dr. York definitely helped kind of push me in that way and get me into neuroradiology.
And your experience with Alaska Radiology Associates back in, was it 2016? Was that your first?
Yeah, so I started doing locums in 2016 while I was still in the military, still working over at JBER, and kind of
thank you for
when I
your
could.
help back then. I mean, you really were a great help. and the opportunity came up to join Alaska Radiology Associates team.
Yeah, that's Chris Reed came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to be part of the group?" And I couldn't say no. I mean, the characters in the group and the members of the group are just so phenomenal, and they get along so well. It's a great group to work with.
And Dr. Christopher Reed is the president of Alaska Radiology Groups, and he is a musculoskeletal radiologist, so he took no offense that you didn't pick his fellowship. But yes, I know he thinks highly of you, and that's why he reached out to you. Your quality and your integrity as an individual is amazing. Let's go back a little bit to what Dr. York, as Alaska Radiology Associates' current lead neuroradiologist, and I'm assuming someday you're going to assume that hat, what he actually brought over the years to the last frontier, to the wonderful state of Alaska. And I'm going to put on my glasses just to read this, make sure I don't get this wrong. So the first one is quantitative lesional and volumetric neuroimaging. Now that's a mouthful. Can you unpack that for the team here?
Yeah. So the quantitative analysis, when we look at neuroimaging, really looks at volumes of the brain in particular. So when we look at things like multiple sclerosis, we look at the volume of the brain as it changes over time as the disease affects it. The other thing we can look at with multiple sclerosis, for example, is the number of lesions that occur. So these white matter lesions over time will change. They may get more, you may get less, depending on how active the disease process is. The quantitative analysis essentially allows us to track these changes over time and give a better or more specific evaluation of the disease process as it continues. We can also use the quantitative analysis when we look back at traumatic brain injuries, or the TBIs. A lot of this for Dr. York came from the military experience in the NFL, but it's also very applicable for Alaskans when we look at all the extreme sports that we like to do in Alaska. We get out with our ATVs and our snow machines, and you're out there.
Snow machines. That's really important.
Yeah,
I'm glad you didn't say snowmobile, being from South
really
Dakota.
Hard for me to do that.
Yeah, this podcast would be done. I'm just kidding. But go ahead. Great stuff.
But yeah, I mean, you're hitting your head potentially with any of these activities, or it gets icy out and you fall and you hit your head, and we worry about the traumatic brain injury. With our quantitative analysis, we can evaluate these things more precisely than if we were just visually looking at the images themselves.
Yeah, believe it or not, a lot of slips and falls in the parking lot.
Yes.
That seems to be like the most predominant that I've heard of anecdotally. So, but you're right. Alaskans do like to get out and play hard, and things happen. Thinking about dementia, that's on a lot of family, as you care for elderly parents or family members. Are we seeing an increase in that, or is that just pretty much tracking with the aging of the U.S.?
Yeah, so I think in general, you're going to see over the next decade or so an increase in the amount of dementia that we see. And part of that is, due to the aging population, the baby boomers coming of age, where they're now starting to get into that range. This is also another area where our quantitative analysis can actually help and look and see if there are specific areas that in the brain that are atrophying more than others or changing more than others. And so the quantitative analysis that we have at Imaging Associates can actually help out with those diagnoses quite a bit.
Any major cause to dementia have they been able to solve as to is there any preventive things people can do?
A lot of it comes down to just vascular dementia. I think a large majority is going to be that. And so maintaining proper cardiovascular health is going to be extremely
exercise
important.
is important.
Yes, exercise, keeping your cholesterol low, all the things that I'm not doing right now. But yeah, those will be very important and to help reduce the possibility. It's not going to change necessarily the overall outcome in the end, but help maybe mitigate some of the issues that arise.
Traumatic brain injury, TBI. We touched on that in some of the causes and why Alaskans are probably more prone to it than many in the lower 48. What are some of the scans that you conduct for TBI?
So one of the main things is just our brain MRIs that we'll look at with our quantitative analysis. We also have PET CT scans that can look at TBI and see if there's differences in the PET scans or positron emission tomography, and essentially what happens with those is we look at the uptake of a radionucleotide to see if there's differences in the brain parenchyma.
So the radionuclide comes in from a cyclotron in Seattle, and it's got a shelf life on it. And the only reason why we can provide that in Anchorage is because the shelf life is so short, we can't even provide it into the Matsu Valley, nevertheless Fairbanks. So that's an interesting exam. And it's basically radioactive sugar water. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just really
that's the easiest way to look at it.
Yeah, great. Anything else about TBI that you would like to share with Alaskans?
I think it's important that, if you're concerned that you have a traumatic brain injury, that you get the best imaging that you can. And so some of that, is going to come from being able to quantitatively analyze, quantitatively analyze, probably speak correctly here. The brain parenchyma itself, and see if there are changes that are more subtle than the eye is going to see.
It just occurs to me that the investment, what I call the recapitalization that we continuously go with, we're a very capital intensive organization. The cost of this technology is very high, and there's a lot of leapfrog technology that's going on that you have to keep up with, and you're always balancing that. I'm really pleased that we're partnered with Siemens from Germany, which seems to be the leader in imaging, as well as GE. We have a 3 Tesla, the newest 3 Tesla in the state of Alaska at our Palmer site, and we're planning on putting the most advanced 3 Tesla GE in our Anchorage site next year. So we continuously recapitalize into the equipment. We hire smart people like you that you can sit down and develop protocols with our technologists so that our exams are literally head and shoulders above any other exams taken in the Northwest. Part a little bit about my history is I was the chief administrative officer for Radia, which is the largest radiology group in the Northwest. 14 hospitals, 100 radiologists at the time. Even though our size is much smaller, I would stand us up against anybody in the world. Simply fantastic subspecialized radiologists, and the equipment and the protocols and the technologists that we hire to get it done. So that's just a little background as to what all goes into providing you, the subspecialized radiologist, the image that you need to make an accurate, clean diagnosis that goes back to someone's physician, whether it's a neurosurgeon, you can go on, and to ensure that the right treatment plan is abided by. So thank you so much for helping. It's much more than just reading images. You're involved in selecting the equipment, testing the not only the hardware and the software, helping guide our technologists with protocol development. There's a lot that goes into all of this, so quite fascinating. fMRI, can you explain to the wonderful people in Alaska what that is all about?
Yeah, so functional MRI, when we look at brain imaging, is specifically looking at tasks. So essentially we're imaging the brain, and as the blood flow changes within the brain, for example, when you do finger tapping, you take your first finger and your thumb and you're tapping it back and forth in the scanner. We can see those changes on the brain, and so we can map that to where it is in the brain. And where this comes, or where it's important, is when you're looking at tumors or a brain mass. And so for the surgeon, it is important to avoid those areas, if at all possible, when they're resecting the brain, the lesion that exists there. And so we can help map out those areas. So some of the things we look at is a motor function. We look at your word finding and your word skills and where they show up in the brain. It's typically on one side or the other. And so if the lesion affects, the one side where it is, we can maybe say, hey, you're going to have more word finding difficulties or difficulties speaking after the examination or after the surgery.
Prepare the patient, not only help
Correct.
the surgeon mitigate the impact as they extract the tumor, but to better educate the patient proactively as to this is what your expectations can be on the other side.
Correct.
How about olfactory?
So we don't do as much with the smelling. It's more vision and words and motor.
Interesting. And so you can actually see the brain light up in different ways as different activities are taking place.
Yeah. So as you're tapping your finger, there's a certain area that's going to light up. As there are a couple different visual tasks where we can see where in the occipital cortex, so in the back part of the brain, where it lights up for your vision as well.
Any recommendations for when, other than surgeries or other than when consulting with the neurosurgeon, any other application of fMRI?
One of the other big ones we use it for is epilepsy or seizures is another functional kind of thing that we can look at with those. Those are realistically the main or primary uses that we have for functional MRI at the current time. I'm sure in the future there will be more options available and expanded just because of the potential that the imaging has.
So all these different imaging applications were introduced by Alaska Radiology Associates for the first time to Alaska. This is something that we were the first and foremost in doing and are still the leading subject matter experts. What a great legacy that we have, and you will be building on that as you go through. Is there anything down the road in the future that you think will be rolling out with regards to neuroradiology?
So one of the things that I think is really interesting is AI, and we will go down too far into the rabbit hole, but one of the things before I left fellowship that they actually introduced was AI Doc.
Yes.
Which I know we have.
We're rolling that out here actually the end of November.
Perfect.
So I'm so glad you brought that up.
So AI Doc is amazing. One, it gives all the radiologists basically a kind of an insight to what's coming down the road. For example, essentially let me go back a second. Essentially what happens with this program is it will look at the study and flag stat kind of findings. So a stat finding being a head bleed. The artificial intelligence is able to find that on a head CT and then notify the radiologist who's on call or whoever's reading of that stat finding and put it at higher on the list.
So just stopping you right there, just pausing you right there. So why that's important is because my doctor could be ordering a head CT for something else, right? And it could just be a routine exam. And this routine exam is accomplished and it goes over to the work list where you have 70, 80 exams on the list waiting to be read. And this AI is smart enough to see this incidental finding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then pop that to the top and light it up and flash it.
Correct. So some of the big things we look at are head bleeds or mass effect in the head.
So this is life-saving technology that we, Alaska Radiology Associates and Imaging Associates, will be the first in the state of Alaska and one of the very few in the entire lower 48, right? Worldwide to roll out. I'm excited.
Yeah,
Trust me.
I'm very excited about it. I mean, it's going to help improve patient care dramatically when it comes to those incidental things that, I mean, with the list and the extent of work that we do, a head CT on an outpatient, if they had a head bleed on it, it might sit there for a little while, not too long, but this will pop it right up to the top of the list and it'll get read immediately and we'll get that patient taken care of.
We've been on through quite a journey this year with regards to a major IT forklift, right? And you helped us significantly. You suffered the pain of going through this massive IT upgrade. We now have Alaska's first and only true unified radiology workflow that has the PACS, the picture archiving system, the voice recognition dictation system, the work list, Clario, and then we have the AI that folds into it. And what's nice is that these tools that we are rolling out are available to all of our partners. When we talk about Norton Sound Healthcare Corporation, we're talking about Samuel Simmons up in Barrow. We're talking about Manilik and Kotzebue, and the list goes on. So anybody who partners with us is going to see the advantage of this technology. And I couldn't be more excited. Saving one life is priceless. Saving many, I can't even articulate what that means to me. The second AI, artificial intelligence, and let me tell you, I've talked to Dr. York and Dr. Reed, and they're big into evaluating all of these AI tools. And there's a lot of crap out there, right? There's a lot of they're putting lipstick on a pig and trying to sell it for lots of money. So there's a lot of work that goes by you wonderful radiologists in evaluating these offerings. One that we have already rolled out just recently is RICO-MD. Do you want to talk a little bit about RICO-MD?
Yeah, this is actually a unique program in that it allows us to essentially give follow-up information and the references for that follow-up within our reports much easier. So the program itself will look at our report and say, we have an incidental finding of, for example, let's say a renal cyst. And there are certain follow-up guidelines for these renal cysts, and the program itself will give us the dedicated recommendation for that and the reference for that we can then pass on to the patients and the clinicians so that they can follow up appropriately for the findings that we have.
It's amazing because it actually also provides the most recent guidance as outcomes medicine evolves, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So it's always changing and it's always getting better, basically.
It's incredible, instantaneous application of knowledge, which makes our subspecialized reports, which are amazing by themselves, even much, much better.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Alaska. What a beautiful state. 2.5 times the size of Texas. You're a South Dakota boy. You love the outdoors. You like to fish and hunt. But we serve a real wide breadth of customers. We have our urban centers like Providence, Alaska Medical Center, Level 2 Trauma Center. And then we have our sites in rural Alaska too. What speaks to your heart, being that you're rural South Dakota, to the rural folks in Alaska?
So I'm going to give one story here. So when I was in medical school, I spent 6 weeks over in the Philippines. And I worked at the Philippines General Hospital, which serves the general population in the Philippines and the outlying islands. So you get to see really what rural medicine happens if you don't have access to care. These people get a chance to come into the hospital maybe once a year, if that. And so they have more advanced disease states. When you look at Alaska, we're lucky because we do have those options and we can provide the care to those people in those outlying villages. And then provide better care when we're able to get better instrumentation out there. We have better MRI scanners and all of that. I think it's important that no matter where you live, you have access to good medical care and the best medical care. And just because you live out there doesn't mean you should be, hamstringed or that you can't get good medicine. You should be able to.
Since 2015, it's just to watch the journey of Alaska Radiology Associates enter into these relationships with these native health corporations and these rural facilities and take their radiology and advance it and provide all of these wonderful folks in rural Alaska the same access to subspecialized radiology that someone in Anchorage has or someone in Seattle or LA has been quite life-changing for these folks. And as they've been able to recapitalize in the equipment, and as we guide them into the equipment selection process and software selection process, I've just seen a drastic increase in the quality of radiology, which is the tip of the spear for diagnosis, right? And then we know, can they stay where they're at and be treated, or do they need to be air evac'd out to a level 2 trauma center or something in between? So it's been, and Imaging Associates is really proud to partner with the same clientele because there's often subspecialized exams that they just don't have the economies of scale to stand up. And so they will send those patients to Imaging Associates where we have all of the data, right? I mean, we see all of the information that they send us. We store all this information. So it's all in one pile. Pile is a good name for it. It's at the South Anchorage Data Center where the state of Alaska and the city of municipality of Anchorage stores all of their data. It's quite incredible to have all that prior history on John Doe. When they come into Anchorage, you have all their priors readily available, which can be life-saving if it's an ER trip. And then it certainly reduces the need for additional imaging. Sometimes, in the past, many times, folks would be traveling from rural Alaska to Anchorage, and they would forget their CT disc or their MRI disc, and they're like, dang, we have to get another exam done. We eliminate that, and that's basically eliminating unnecessary cost and unnecessary radiation in some cases by the tune of 20%.
Yeah.
So it's quite material. What a great story we have to say. I appreciate you as a strong physician leader at Alaska Radiology Associates and Imaging Associates. Dr. Miner, is there anything you'd just like to wrap up and share with the wonderful folks of Alaska?
I think, I love this state. It's a great place to live and a great place, and everybody up here is so friendly, and I want people to stay in Alaska. And I think one of the ways to keep people in Alaska is to be able to provide, that great medical care, and so they don't have to go elsewhere. And so I think, we're able to provide some of the best medical care that's out there just by having the subspecialists, like you had mentioned, and providing those subspecialty reports and taking care of the Alaskans like we should.
I love it. It's very applicable here and now and in the future. When you look at what Alaska leadership, the political leadership, our federal representatives have in plan for Nome and Barrow and places like that, being able to provide that level of support to, the workforce out there, and just to the families that live in the community is a game changer. So thank you for what you do in helping Alaska Radiology Associates, Imaging Associates, our mutual clients, and the overall state of Alaska, and taking us to the next level. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Imaging Alaska, expert radiology, exceptional care.